It's for me to shuffle paper. And put my glasses up. Okay, Jeff Beaton has been a nature lover for over 45 years. For the past 35 years, he has led a variety of bird, nature, and history tours, and that was locally, nationally, and internationally. He's the author of 3 books, Dragonflies and Damselflies of Georgia, and also 2 birding books. He's a co-author of 2 additional birding books and co-author of Tiger Beetles of the Southeast. He's a senior author and editor of the annotated checklist of Georgia birds. He's often found far afield. When he returned a phone call for me, I could hear odd sounds in the background. And I asked where he was at, and I think he was like hip deep on little St. Simon's Island in a tributary counting bugs or something. He's often found far afield studying and photographing dragonflies, robber flies, tiger beetles, caterpillars, and jumping spiders. He and his wife, Allie, live near Palmetto, Georgia, and with their 2 sons, 2 twin sons. They'll be 9 years old this spring, I think. And I would like to encourage you to take a look at his website, giftbeacon.com. I spent an hour or so on it today, and it's just absolutely fascinating. Gift has, in addition to all these other activities, he finds time to be a captain for Delta Airlines, flying 737s. He's been with them for over 30 years. Please give a warm backyard welcome to Gift Beacon.
You're too kind. I told him to keep that short, and he did not listen to me. I'll try to make up for it by keeping this sort of short. Slideshow. Oh, you got it? Okay. Okay. All right, so as you can see, I know all of you can read. This is going to be an introduction to dragonflies and damselflies of Georgia. Technically, what we're talking about, the whole group are called odonates, which comes from the Greek word odont, because they all have teeth on their labia as larvae, which makes them such fearsome predators. If I can't teach you anything else tonight, I'm going to teach you the difference between a dragonfly and a damselfly. A damselfly is not a female dragonfly. There are 2 different suborders. I hear some chuckles, but you would be probably surprised how many, mostly a generation before all of y'all, that they just thought damselflies were female dragonflies, but they're not. They're 2 different suborders. The larger suborder is Anisoptera, which are the dragonflies, and just about all of them have these characteristics. They're a lot more robust. Their bodies, their thoraxes are much larger, their abdomens, the wings are larger. They hold their wings out to the side like this one is. Sometimes when they're perched, they'll put their wings forward, which makes them able to take off more quickly. But mostly they hold them out to the sides. The eyes on the head are very large, and they're either touching along a seam like this, or they're very close together, less than 1 eye width apart for those of you that are into details. Anisoptera means unequal wings, because the forewings are smaller and narrower than the hind wings. This is an adaptation for gliding flight. Now for damselflies, they pretty much all look a lot like this. They're much smaller. They're typically shorter. They're typically more slender. And they appear, and they actually are, more dainty. Almost all of them keep all 4 wings clasped together over their abdomen like this. Now I should warn you that brand new dragonflies that have just emerged from the water can hold their wings like this just for a brief time. But if you see a brightly colored odonate and it has its wings held together over its abdomen, it is a damselfly. Now there are a couple of damselflies that hold their wings out to the side, like spread wings, but I'll give you an example of that later. There's not many of them. The easiest way to tell, everybody always wants, the silver bullet. Down on dragonflies, giant eyes very close together. Damselflies have little eyes on the end of a skinny head. Some people say, oh, like a hammerhead shark. Or some people say like a little barbell or a dumbbell that you lift weights with. But you can see that these eyes are way more than the width of one eye apart. So if you're looking at something and you're not sure if it's a dragonfly or a damselfly, look at the head. And you can always tell there are no exceptions to that rule. We don't have that many rules with no exceptions, but this is one. So hopefully that'll help you. If you're trying to identify odonates in the field, it's much easier to start if you know if it's a dragonfly or damselfly, because if you have to just go straight to color, you're going to have a hard time telling, because there's like a lot of green ones and a lot of yellow ones. And this zygoptera means equal wings because all four wings are exactly the same size and shape. So those are the difference between the two groups. One other thing I'd like to point out, they have really teeny tiny antennae, like that's one right here. When you see a lot of dragonfly art, a lot of times they have really long antennae, which looks wonderful, and that's artistic expression, but you don't see that on real odonates. And that's how you can tell some similar insects are not odonates. This is an antlion with super long antennae. It looks kind of like a damselfly. This looks kind of like a hybrid between a damselfly and a dragonfly, but it too has super long antennae, so you know they're not odonates. Now some of you might be saying, geez, antlions, who's ever heard of an antlion? Who knows what a doodlebug is? So, that's a doodlebug. And they sit at the bottom of little cones in sand. You see them most often when you walk under a bridge, and they have real fine sand along the trail, and all those little pits in the sand have that guy at the bottom of it. Now he's moving because they do not like to sit still when they're above ground, where I had taken to try to get a picture. Those are pinchers.
Yep, is that the same thing as an antlion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. As a kid, that's what I was.
Yes, sir. That's exactly what they are. And so there are maybe a few people in here who have gone and captured ants and put them in the pit to see this in action. And what happens is the sand is so loose, the ants cannot climb out. And the little grains of sand that they send to the bottom, that guy starts snapping his jaws at the bottom, and then the ant eventually gets to the bottom, and then that's food for the antlion. But I digress, as I often do. So anything with long antennae is not a dragonfly or a damselfly. Just real quickly, guidebooks will tell you to look at the pattern on the thorax, which is this big part here that has both pairs of wings and all three pairs of legs, like all insects. And there are 10 abdominal segments, and sometimes they have colors on different ones. The easiest way to tell males from female is to look underneath the base of the abdomen. If there's a little bump, like here, it's a male. If there's no bump, if it's just smooth, it's a female, and that will also help you with identification. I could talk for an hour about odonate flight, and we don't have time for that, but let me just tell you, they can go from 0 to 30 miles per hour like that. They can go sideways, they can go backwards, they can go up, they can go down, they can carry more than their own weight. They can hover, and the way they do all these wonderful things is they can beat their wings in different ways. If they beat both wings in phase at the same time, that's for speed. If they beat the wings out of phase, it's almost like a helicopter. Not exactly, I know there's some aeronautics people in here, but by beating the sets of wings at different times, that gives them the maneuverability. And they are really incredible flyers. So how long have they been around? Well, the ancestors of dragonflies have been around for 300 million years. This is a very crude little timeline here, but we're kind of over here. And the dinosaurs started around here, 229 million years ago. The griffin flies, which were the prototype dragonflies, and then the true dragonflies appeared at 250, right here at the beginning of the Triassic, before all the dinosaurs. And they obviously have outlived them all, despite what Jurassic Park would have you believe. These guys, back in the Permian, had 30-inch wingspans. They were giant. Back then, the Earth's atmosphere had a lot more oxygen in it than it does now, and a lot of insects were supersized. So, you know, we're pretty brave with our little insect nets going out to catch little dragonflies, little butterflies, but if there was a 3-foot-long dragonfly flying around, I'd be, you know, diving in the pond and using a little breathe to breathe out of. Anyway, this fossil here is from Kansas, 250 million years ago, and that is almost the exact body, style, shape, wing venation of a group of dragonflies called the petal tails that is still exists today, unchanged in 250 million years. That tells you how successful they are as a group. Life cycle is pretty simple. The eggs are laid in the water. That they turn into a nymph. The older books and older teaching used to call them naiads. That term has fallen out of favor. Now they're called nymphs, or you can call them larvae, just like you can for any other insect. And that life stage can be as short as a month or as long as 4 years. And then once they emerge from the water to become an adult, they only live 1 or 2 months. So when you see that dragonfly flying around, that's the end. And that's only a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks long. So enjoy them while they're around. They spend all this time underwater as super important parts of the aquatic ecosystem, both as food and as predators. But once they're out, they're getting near the end. And as you can see, for the ones that are underwater 4 years, more than 90% is underwater. So they are much more important to the ecosystem as larvae than they are as adults, although they're important there as well. The nymphs have a hinged lip, and it sits under their mouth like this. And this is where the teeth and the hooks are. And when they see something, they whip that thing out and grab the food and bring it in. Just like that, you're going, all right, come on. That's a dragonfly nymph, and he's eating a fish? No lie. Now that was set up in a tank, but still. That's what they do. And they are really, really fearsome little predators underwater. So they spend all this time as larvae. You can still tell them apart. They're much harder to identify the species. All damselflies have a fairly skinny body, and they have these kind of airy looking things, which are called caudolandulae, and those are actually their gills. That is how they breathe. Now dragonflies, I have to take a look around and make sure there's no little kids in here. Their gills are actually inside their rectum. And you can always tell if there are little kids because they immediately start giggling. But they actually have their gills inside their rectum, and the way they get through the water is they constrict their abdomen, and they look like little squid, you know, shooting through the water. This particular nymph, that's a comet darner larva. And you can see that the rocks are very similar in both of these. That's because they're in a tank. I have a little tank with slanted sides so you can shoot through the glass without getting a reflection.
Approximately how long would that larva be?
That larva's pretty big. It's about this big. If you're a trout fisherman, that's your nymph right there. So when I put him in the tank's only this big. He spent 10 minutes shooting around, and I had to wait for him to get tired. He got tired, took a breather, and that's when I got my shots. So they do not have the caudolandulae, the external gills. That's the easiest way to tell those two apart. If you are ever walking along the edge of a pond or a stream and you see a dragonfly or damselfly nymph crawl out of the water, if you have about an hour, just sit on the ground, make sure there's no fire ant hills, pull up a little piece of wood or find something to sit on, because for the next hour, this thing is going to come out of the water The nymph will crawl out of the water to and some of them do it at night, most of them do it during the day. They wait for their skin to harden. And then they first split it right here by the thorax. And next it looks like something out of a really bad Sigourney Weaver alien movie. This thing comes straight up, this ghostly green or yellow color. These are tracheal tubes that they were breathing out of that no longer are used. They come straight out, they wobble around for a minute, and then they yank the end of their abdomen out. And you're probably saying to yourself, dude, that's like a miniature. Well, they are compressed inside the nymph shell. And they sit there for about 45 minutes, and you can see them pumping their version of blood, which is hemolymph, like it is in all insects. And the abdomen will get longer and longer and longer, and these are the wings, and they will get longer and longer and longer. And after about an hour, there's the nymph, the leftover shell, and here's the dragonfly. The abdomen's almost completely extended, the wings are extended, and now they will sit there like that for a little while. Then all of a sudden the wings will flap out to the side, they'll let them harden for a while, and then off they go. This is the most critical part of any dragonfly or damselfly's life, because they are completely defenseless. They can't do anything. They can't run, they can't hide, they can't fly. So a lot of species have mass emergences where thousands of them are all coming out at the same time. And does this draw a ton of predators? Of course it does. But the key is not for all of them to survive, it's just for enough of them to survive to start the next generation. The leftover shell is called an exuvia if it's singular, exuvia if it's plural. You can still tell who was a damselfly and who was a dragonfly because you can still see even the external skin of those gills, the caudal end. And you can, if you're really good, better than me, you can identify every exuvia by the exact size and shape, and you know, whether it has a little hook here or a little hook here, and all kinds of little details. And for some of the rare species that hang out, for example, in treetops, the only way to get a survey of a population is to go look for exuvia, because you hardly ever see the adults. So some of us actually go out and collect these and measure them and try to identify them. So now we're back at the water. After they emerge, they spend about 2 to 3 weeks maturing, flying around, eating everything in sight. Their colors get stronger, their wings get stronger, their exoskeleton gets stronger, and then they come back to the water, and then they wait. This is a purple blewit. It's a male. You can tell, you can't really see his little accessory genitalia there, but you can tell by the appendages that it's a male. But he is just sitting there in the stream and he is waiting. What do you think he's waiting for? Food? Female. He's also waiting for other males, mostly to drive them off. So the way odonate breeding biology works, the females mature out in the fields and pastures and woods. When they are ready to lay eggs, they come back to the water. And they are looking for the best patch of water for eggs and dragonfly nymphs. It's got to be well oxygenated, maybe it needs cover. If it's a species that hangs out under rocks, maybe it needs rocks. The price they pay for being able to lay their eggs is they have to get their eggs fertilized. So they come to the water. Males are completely indiscriminate and will just grab or try to grab any female that comes by. For the more primitive dragonflies, there's no behavior. She flies in, he tries to grab her. If she doesn't want to be grabbed, she flies away. If he grabs her and she doesn't want to stay grabbed, she flies away. In about the latter half of both dragonflies and damselflies, there's actually behavior. The female will fly a wing. She can curl her abdomen to say yes or no. She can do wing displays, so there is a little bit of breeding behavior. Once they decide they're going to connect, she allows him to grab her with his appendages right behind the neck there. she's got these little recesses in the top of her prothorax that fit exactly the appendages on a male. It's like a lock and a key. That's to prevent species that don't belong together from attempting to breed. You will occasionally see pairs, mismatched pairs, but they don't stay together very long and they're never successful. So it's kind of self-policing in that way. So then what he has to do is he kind of has to fertilize himself before he can fertilize the female, because all of his sperm packets are produced back here at the tip of his abdomen. But he can only deliver them through that little bump I told you about, the accessory genitalia. So once he has a willing female, he will bring his abdomen up to the tip of his own abdomen to the base of his own abdomen to transfer the sperm to where he can actually deliver them to the female. Then they will fly along like this for a little while. This is called the tandem position. And they can either perch like this or they can fly like this. And it's always the male in the front. And you'll see why in about a second. Because the female's got to curl her abdomen underneath and tuck it up to his accessory genitalia where he just placed all those sperm. And you might think, well, after all that, they're done, right? No. Odonates and one group of spiders, the males have two special little paddles that they can go into the female and remove the sperm that are in there from any other males.
Oh my God.
This actually works for both sexes because the male's doing a lot of work trying to fertilize her, and he wants to make sure after all this work that it's actually his sperm that are going to fertilize those eggs. And what the female does is she'll get fertilized by this male, and then she'll say, oh, actually, that's better habitat over there. I would rather have my eggs fertilized in that habitat. So she'll fly over there, and then the male scoops out about 95% of all previous deposits. And then at the end of all of that work, oh, I forgot to say, this is called the wheel position. Some people, if you're real romantic, you might call that a heart. But only on damselflies, they're actually much more limber than dragonflies. Then they go off to lay their eggs. Now some males just let the females go off like darners. And the females have this is a little cutting blade called a stylus. And they actually cut holes in aquatic vegetation. This one is underwater. And they will deposit the eggs inside the stem of that plant to protect them from predators and from parasites, which are an even bigger problem for eggs. The rest of these do what is called contact guarding, which is where the male literally holds onto the female while she is depositing the eggs. And you might be saying to yourself, wow, that's a really unique behavior. I've never seen that before. If you've ever been in a bar at closing time, I've seen contact guarding. Just see who's listening. All right, so it's all about location. This is a little pond down near Jessup, just a little ways off the Altamaha River. And I had gotten to know the owner of this small farm, and he had all these dragonflies and damselflies in his pond because it was all lily pads. Well, he sold the farm to a man who loved to fish. And he didn't like to fish where the lily pads were. So he took out all the lily pads, which was great for fishing, but it wasn't great for all the damselflies that wanted to lay their eggs on the lily pads. So there were, like, no exaggeration, 40 pairs of orange bluets flying around the 3 remaining lily pads. I, of course, saw that and was horrified. Went immediately to talk to the guy. He was actually a really nice guy. And when I explained it, he said, that's cool. So now half the pond is lily pads and half the pond is open. And he likes to fish right along the edge of the lily pads, which is a really smart place to fish. But it's all, if you are a bluet, an orange bluet that wants to lay your eggs on lily pads, if you can't find lily pads, you won't lay your eggs. So they are that specific about what the substrate is they're going to put their eggs into. Sometimes you will see odonates with little bumps on them. These are actually mites in the genus Hydocarina. And this is kind of a typical one that's got just a few mites. I think there's another one or two here. This is a female. She's not going to have any trouble breeding. This guy here is not going to be able to breed because he is not going to be able to curve his abdomen around enough to get his sperm packets from there to there. So this guy doesn't know it, but his genes are on their way out of the pool. But that is about the heaviest load I've ever seen on a single drive. I really wanted to kind of catch him and pick him up and scrape some off, but the damage was already done. So, not all fun and games. It's really cool being a dragonfly and being pretty and flying around and chasing stuff, but there's a lot of other things that want to chase you too. This is a green lynx spider, and that's a blue dasher, very common dragonfly. It's even worse if you're a damselfly because they're slower and they're not as aerobatic. They're not as easy for them to get away. This is a robber fly called Triorla interrupta, and everything eats damselflies. And a lot of birds eat dragonflies and damselflies. Some people say, you know, I have a pond and I have tons of mosquitoes. What can I bring in purple martins to eat the mosquitoes? Well, purple martins actually eat the dragonflies that were eating the mosquitoes. So what you really want to have in your pond, if it's little, is just a few dragonflies. An average, that blue dragonfly that had all the water mites on it, that dragonfly eats about 300 mosquito-sized insects per day. That's a lot of mosquitoes out of your yard. So that's really what you want. But turnabout, as they say, is fair play.
Ooh.
That's a dragon hunter. That's this guy, the biggest dragonfly in Georgia. You'll be pleased to know that this was a bird lover that took this shot. And as soon as he, of course, had to take the shot first, but as soon as he took the shot, he ran over, he got the dragon hunter off the hummingbird. The hummingbird was fine. You can tell it's an immature, it's got a really short bill. And adults have a bill that's almost twice as long as that. But that's a pretty bad predator if he can take down a hummingbird. If you want to see more different species of dragonflies and damselflies, you got to go to different places. If you want to be a botanist and you want to see different plants, do you spend all your time in a bog? No. Do you spend all your time, on a bald somewhere? No. But if you go to both of them, you can double the number of species you can see probably. Same thing with dragonflies and damselflies. This is a coastal, marshy diked pond. This is a sandy coastal plain river, the Ahupi, down in Tatnall County. This river and this river have like 90% different fauna in dragonflies. This is the Totaliga River down in High Falls State Park. If you want to go somewhere to see a lot of dragonflies, that's easy. I would go to some place with a pond, like right here, in the summer, and I would go down to High Falls State Park. Because they've got trails that go right next to the river, and there's probably 50 species that live just at that park. And then you can also go down to a cypress palm down in the coastal plain. As with all habitats that you go out into in nature, you need to be a little bit careful when you're oohing and ahhing over the dragonflies and the plants and everything else, because sometimes there's a welcoming committee. All right, so some of you may have been here when I was here a couple years ago, did a talk about bird migration. Dragonflies migrate too. Much like birds, they don't have the stamina, they can't go as far, but they use a lot of the same cues. They wait for cold fronts, they wait for tailwinds. There's about 18 known species in North America that migrate. These are the 5 most common, and we have all of these here except variegated meadowhawk is very, very rare. If you're ever down on Jekyll or Tybee in September and a cold front comes through, you can see hundreds and thousands of dragonflies just flying right down the coast as they go south for a little warmer time before they lay their eggs and move on. Some species have both residents and migrants, like green darners. And like I said, they follow a lot of the same cues as birds and monarch butterflies. I'm sure a lot of you probably know about the migration of monarch butterflies, which is also astonishing. So I'm going to lead you through just a couple images of some of the different dragonflies and damselflies we have in Georgia. These are some of the bigger ones. Remember when I said there was one group of damselflies that hold their wings out? And they're called spread wings. And this is one of them. There's only 8 of them. So there's not very many. There's about 175 odonates in Georgia, about 125 dragonflies, about 50 damselflies. And there's only 8 of the damselflies that have the wings spread, but they still have the little hammerhead shark head. This is a stream species, this is a stream species. I'm just trying to show you some of the different colors. These are all pond damselflies, which are much smaller. Most of these are about this big. So if you want to find them, like you have to walk along the edge and you have to look right into the bushes and right into the grasses to look for stuff. But as you can see, there's a lot of different colors. Red, and green, and blue, and yellow. Really pretty. Some of them are geographically variable. This is a dusky dancer in Georgia. The front of the dusky dancer in Texas looks the same, but he doesn't have any of the blue marks on the abdomen. So you got to be careful about just learning one mark. This is the primitive dragonfly I told you about, the petal tail. It and the dragon hunter are the biggest dragonflies in Georgia. These are pretty common right around here, as are dragon hunters. They are unlike every other kind of dragonfly. Their larvae don't live in ponds and lakes and streams. They live in wet, like sphagnum seeps. They don't go down to the water to breed. The females perch vertically on tree trunks. So you'll see these giant male gray petal tails just flying through the forest like this, going up and down trees, looking for females. No other dragonfly does that. So if you see that behavior, it's a great petal tail. These are among the biggest dragonflies, darners. This is called a comet darner because when you see it flying, you've got this little green body with this bright red tail. If you get it in the sunlight, it's really something to see. Supposedly that looks like a comet. This one's called a springtime darner because it's only out in spring. These are some club tails. They're called club tails because the end of the abdomen is kind of swollen. And you might be saying, good Lord, those are all yellow and they're all black and they all look exactly the same. Well, there's differences in the pattern and the shape of the tip. And also there are other club tails that look differently. Here's a green one, and here's a yellowish green one, and there's a kind of pale green and brown one. So there are some differences, but there are a bunch of them. Spike tails are called spike tails because females have a very pointed ovipositor, and if there's one in a stream laying eggs, it's just vertically up and down like a sewing machine needle. No other dragonfly does that. So if you see that behavior, you know you have a spike tail. This safe spike tail is only known from Georgia and Florida. The southeastern part of Georgia and the northeastern part of Florida, about 40 known sites. That's it, worldwide. 40 known sites. So it's state listed in both Georgia and Florida. These are called cruisers, and they're called cruisers because that's about all they do. It's very rare to find them perched somewhere. These guys will just kind of cruise down the center of the stream, chilling, but if they see something they want, like you're looking at it and then it's gone because they can accelerate on a dime. These are called emeralds because most of them have these bright green, emerald green eyes. This one here is called a smoky shadow dragon, as it says. Shadow dragons are in a small group. The genus is called Neurocordulia. They only come out at dusk for about 45 minutes. That's it. They're either the most efficient dragonflies known, because they get all their day's business done in 45 minutes, or the rest of them are just really, really inefficient. But they are only out at dusk, and that makes them very hard to study. They're very hard to catch, because they're only out when it's basically dark, and you can't ever find them perched. So you might be saying to yourself, how does the author of a guidebook get pictures of smoky shadow dragons? That was the most challenging species in that entire book. I went down to the Altamaha River at dusk. I waded up to my neck in the Altamaha River, which is not just full of dragonflies, but lots of other things which I was not interested in finding at dusk. And you hold your net, and when you hear the clatter of wings, you wildly swing. And you hope to get some. And if you're younger than I am now, I was able to catch a bunch of them. Mostly because I went to the boat ramp at Doctortown, and there's a big pulp mill across the river with lights. So I would get on this side of the river so I could look toward the lights, and sometimes I could see one of these boogers cruising along. And I caught about 15 of them. And I saved them alive, unharmed, overnight. And the next morning, I took that stick and I jabbed it in the ground at a place where I had a nice distant green background. And I very carefully took each dragonfly out, sweetly asked it to stay on the perch, put it on the perch, slowly backed away, and it's all fly away. One stick. That was it. That's a true story. These are the most common dragonflies you will find are the skimmers. When you go to a pond, what you see mostly is skimmers. This one here, super common, common whitetail. These are fairly common. These, as I said, are fairly rare in Georgia. The blue corporal is one of the earliest dragonflies to come out. They'll be out in less than a month. March 4th, March 5th, the first ones will come out. And you may be saying to yourself, dude, blue corporal? Really? Well, I put this picture in here because it shows you the one little bar, which is how it got its name. But once they mature, they become blue, so they really are blue. A few more. This is the other super common one in Georgia, the blue dasher. These are very common in the coastal plain. They're starting to move up. Totally unique. Nothing else has that kind of pink-purple color. Black saddlebags is one of the ones that migrates. And just a word of warning, sexual dimorphism means the males look different from the females, not just in shape, but in color. That is a male eastern podhawk. That is a female eastern podhawk. That's why it's super helpful to tell if you're looking at a male or a female. Because if you go into a book looking for green, unless you're looking at the females, you're not going to find that one. But this species is super common too. That's my book. That's my website. It's got a lot of dragonfly pictures and information about them if you're interested. And that's my show. Absolutely. I will answer any questions y'all have, if you have any. Yes, ma'am.
The emergence, is that, what's the season?
So that's a great question. It depends on the species. Most of the most common dragonflies are what we call summer species. And they come out from like April to September. So you will see different ones emerging all summer long. The blue corporal, they only emerge in March and early April. That's it. You saw Town's clubtail. They only emerge in August and September. So any of the warm months, nothing emerges in the winter because there's nothing for them to eat. But starting around mid-March, really maybe the first week of April is when we start getting a lot of things emerging in Georgia, and they'll be pretty strong through the beginning of September. Good question.
When I grew up in South Fulton County 70 years ago, fished all the streams, we called this animal, and I'm hoping somebody else will back me up. We call them snake doctors. Have you ever heard that?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. I'm glad to hear that.
No, super
it lives on. But we call them snake doctors, and then invariably over the next 2 or 3 days, we're going to see a dead snake. We say, oh boy, that snake doctor didn't get to that snake in time. But I mean, so we kind of propagated that fantasy. Also,
I'm glad you said fantasy.
This is the truth.
No basis.
This is the truth, according to my uncle, and he trained us on how to fish. If a snake doctor lights on your pole, you're not going to catch any more fish. You've got to move at least 50 paces downstream to continue. Or if you've got chewing tobacco in your mouth and can hit the dragonfly, you're going to catch a lot of fish.
So your uncle sounds like a pretty interesting guy.
Oh,
concept of adults pulling the legs of. If you are at a pond or a stream and you have a dragonfly light on your rod, that just tells you that there's dragonflies in the water, which means it's probably productive water.
Now, serious.
And I don't know why an 8-year-old would have troops back anyway.
I heard that in one species, and I think it's in Georgia, some blue ones, where the color, as of in recent years, this was somewhat speculative, it's not proven yet, but the colors was diminishing. The intensity of the color was diminishing, and it was possibly handicapping the sexual, the reproductive process.
That is a widespread phenomenon. It is happening the world over. And what is happening is, as the earth is warming, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but if you don't think climate change is real, you have to open your eyes, because it is real, and it is showing up in every facet of biology: plants, insects, birds, everything. So what's happening is, as it's getting warmer, the males that have expansive black in their wings are evolving to have less black, because then they don't overheat as much. However, females are still using sexual selection on males, and they tend to like bigger, flashier patterns. So now you have two forces, opposing forces acting on one organism. That's what evolution is. And we will see what happens. But males with smaller patterns are not as successful breeding, but they are more successful temperature-wise. So that's not just, you did not hear that from your uncle, because that's true.
No. He told me that. Okay, additional questions?
Yes, sir.
I wonder if you know the name, my favorite damselfly. I believe it's a stream breeder, but it's a black wing with a bright metallic green
Yes,
bottom.
that
I
is
love
an
those.
ebony jewel wing.
Ebony jewel
Yes, sir.
wing?
If you come up afterwards, I'll show you a picture in the book.
Yeah, they're beautiful. I
They're
love them.
beautiful, very common, and they are one of the most advanced damselflies. They have the most complicated display behavior between males and females. You never see fighting or grabbing and releasing. I mean, it's all choreographed, and they are stunning in good light.
Are they-
And they're very common around.
Are they stream breeders?
Yes, sir. Small streams and seeps, mostly. I love that one too.
Additional questions?
What's the main predator?
So they have a lot of predators underwater, which are mostly fish, but also turtles and wading birds. Most per period of time, emergence is when everything eats them. And you'll see squirrels, mink, everything running up and down the banks of rivers when you're having one of these mass emergencies, because it's like a candy store.
You know, on the lake that I live on, the white egrets, and I don't know what they're eating, but they totally feed like 8 foot from the edge, and they're down in the mud. And so I'm
Could
wondering,
easily be,
Yeah.
birds probably are the number one.
but don't you think maybe humans are the greatest predator?
Well, we're not actually so much a predator as we are a habitat destroyer.
But yeah, you know, we're minimizing and eliminating small
Sure,
streams.
think about all the streams you used to fish in South Fulton.
Oh,
I bet
yeah.
most of them aren't even streams.
They're flash flood zones. Okay, any additional questions? Well, I'm going to tell you, if you've taken a subject that it's not exactly mainstream gardening, for sure, but turns it into a fascinating presentation, and we really appreciate it. You did a great job. We'll be over here at the book afterwards. All right, and then we'll have our drawing for